Well, hello, dear viewers. My name is Alexander, the Unconventional Gentleman.
And I'm Casey's Hammer Fighter.
And this
is Downtime.
Well, good morning and hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Downtime Studio. Once again, I'm one of your dual hosts, Alex, the Unconventional Gentleman.
And I'm Casey's Hammer Fighter, martial arts extraordinaire, and all-around tough guy.
Every time he lifts up one of his arms, my nose dies.
Oh, like you're one to talk, smog butt.
I'll take my smog butt over your rotten armpits any day of the week, pal.
Oh!
Oh, boy. Now, as you just saw, folks, Casey's and I had just reenacted one of our lost forms of comedy in history, which, of course, is slapstick comedy.
That's right, Unconventional Gentleman, you old rust bucket old pal of mine.
Now, that's it got personal.
When it comes to slapstick comedy, there's no other fun-loving trio than the kings of comedy themselves. Our pals, the Three Stooges.
The Three Stooges. Without getting too much into their long and historic comedic antics, the Three Stooges are the trio comedy kings of slapstick. Back from all the way to 1933 and on to the 1973, which of course is nuts. No joke. They were the living legends, way ahead of the curve when it came to their goofy storytelling and of course their over-the-top comedic slapstick.
I want you to be a nice boy. When you're a nice boy, your fairy godmother always watches over you. Your fairy godmother always
The
watches
slapstick
over you.
almost could have been a martial arts style of its own, chock full of hard hits with great humor. These guys not only did slapstick, they practically wrote the book on it. And in fact, in some fanfics, they're even senseis of slapstick. Man, I was sure to hate having Mo as my sensei. Yow!
Thanks to the ever-growing popularity, in part by Columbia Pictures, the Stooges basically soared, with their faces ending up being on memorabilia everywhere back in the 1950s. They had first revolutionized TV by airing reruns of the Three Stooges all over the world, which is what created the worldwide popularity of the Three Stooges.
W-O. Woof. Make it like Erie. I got an uncle there.
And to think it was just time for them when they were about to retire. But the Miracle TV kept them going.
Despite Columbia Pictures' contract soon to run out with Three Stooges due to the original CEO of said company, the Stooges went on to finish a number of short films and full-length motion pictures before and after the contract ran. And with the inclusion of Curly Joe after the former of Besser left the company basically because he was no real Stooge at all. And plus, with Shemp and Curly's death, they needed a third Stooge, and Joe Dorita, or Curly Joe, was their best candidate.
Three Stooges, more like two Stooges than one sellout.
Anyway, with the Three Stooges' careers heading into their twilight years, they started veering away from short film and even TV episode segments and focused mainly on theatrical movie releases. You know, they took stories from popular fantasy films or anything like that and sort of just added a little bit of the actual story and followed it up by a lot of the Three Stooges' wackiness. And hands down, one of the best retelling of a fairy tale that the Stooges have ever done is, of course, the one and only Snow White and the Three Stooges.
I know what you're thinking, good buddy of mine. We're doing a retelling of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs meets the Three Stooges in this comedic fantasy and adventure.
By now, you are probably very familiar with the general plot of Snow White. How she was the rightful princess of Fortunia, the kingdom, and her father was the rightful king of Fortunia as well. But all that would come screeching to an end, as on her birthday in the dead of winter, her father would pass away due to a very mysterious illness. Yeah, mysterious like my butt. Anyway, as she was so filled with grief, the princess could not see that behind her, like literally right behind her, her evil stepmother, the evil wicked queen, was plotting against her with his right-hand man, Count Olga. Using their position, they usurped power from the princess, and then had her secretly imprisoned in the North Tower, never to be seen again. They had made up a story that the princess was so bereaved with grief that as the princess was up in the tower, singing pathetically and very sad and lonely, her townspeople thought she was just in mourning, and they would most likely see her in a few weeks or so. But during that time, as it passed and the queen was getting more power, and by the way, recklessly rich is basically put the entire town in poverty, for crying out loud, she then had the wicked plot of having the princess murdered far, far away. She would have one Hordrick the huntsman take her up into the enchanted forest under the guise that one of her oldest friends and handmaiden needed her help. The princess rushed right to her, only to find no one as she was in the forest alone with the huntsman. And at that moment, the huntsman, taking this opportunity, raised his dagger, going to plunge it in the very chest of our princess, taking her heart as proof that the deed was done to the evil queen. But just as Hordrick raised up his dagger, ready for the killing blow, he couldn't do it. The guilt inside of him was just too much, as he knew the princess, and not only was she a very beautiful woman, she was so heartful and kind that he just couldn't bring himself to do it. So instead, Hordrick had revealed her the queen's evil plot. He then told the princess to run straight into the enchanted forest, so that she would never be seen again, but would always be protected from the evil queen. But since it was at the dead of night, as she finally got to the center of the woods, she was filled with so much terrifying and scary imagery that the poor princess was so rattled and feared that she was screaming her head off as she ran deeper into the woods. But finally, as the horizon broke from the birches of the trees, she finally found salvation in a very familiar place. You know it, I know it. The cottage of the 7 dwarves, their one and only true bachelor home. Unfortunately for the princess, though, the dwarves would not be arriving this year, as they were hip deep in King Solomon's mines, as they were basically mining precious gems and jewels for the king there. And they would not return until early next winter. But, ever the crafty devil, the princess, she managed to break herself into the cottage, and when she found no one in sight, she ran straight up into their bedroom upstairs, flopping on the nearest mattress, and cried her eyes out for the rest of the night.
Yes, as far as the book to the classic movie that we know, but don't forget, my metal friend, there are certain changes in the story that we need to talk about. For starters, there are no 7 dwarves, and that part that the dwarves play are now being played by our favorite comedian slapstick copy act, the Three Stooges. They're a band of traveling entertainers who go from town to town, not only entertaining the villagers, but also sell their medicine? Yuck! After being chased out of the kingdom of Fortunia, the Three Stooges hid by the riverbank, but when they discovered the same guy, Hordrick the Huntsman, is trying to kill the little boy, the big league hero trio of savers had to step in. They intervened and saved the boy from being killed by Hordrick the Huntsman, but they were all too late that they discovered that the boy had fallen over on a rock, hitting his head and forgetting all about who he was when they woke him up. After feeling sorry for the boy, they care for him almost like substitute dads or even uncles as they raise up the boy to be a proper young man and call him Cuatro, which means 4 in Spanish.
I guess all those times at the 25-cent taco stand started to pay off. Hey, Cases?
In response to
Don't diss my taco time, you metal bucket!
Although the Three Stooges had no idea that Quadro himself was Prince Charming all along, nor did the Princess Snow White know that she was talking to her once and future husband. It didn't stop the six of them from growing very attached to each other, as the Three Stooges came to see Snow White as almost like a daughter of sorts, another child to take care of, just like Quattro. And Quattro himself had fallen head over heels for the princess. It was at that moment that all of them, Quattro and the Stooges, vowed to protect Snow White, to keep her safe at all times.
They always have to make it so mushy with the romance, don't they?
Unfortunately for the Stooges, Quattro, and the princess, their fun and merriment times would not last, as the Queen's guards rushed in towards the cottage to find the princess. Unfortunately, they found Quattro instead, and it was revealed to them that he might be the prince, as he himself had been quite looked at and sought after he was revealed by Hordrick that the prince had lived from the attack.
Those jerks! I'll take them on one at a time! Let me at him! Let me at him! Hey, I'm getting 1, 2, 1, 2! I'm gonna get 1, 2 at a time!
Sit there,
Yeah, fine!
Anyway, after the guards had captured Quattro, they taken him back to the palace. It is there where the evil queen and her right-hand man, Count Olga, plan to discover whether or not Quattro truly is Prince Charming. They do this by using the service of an old handmaiden back to from his kingdom of Valvuria. She basically tells them the way to discover whether or not he is the prince is if he has a birthmark on his right shoulder in the shape of a crescent moon. Once they tore open his shirt, they've discovered that he truly is Prince Charming. It is that where the evil queen and Count Olga plan to have him executed discreetly after the party, of course. But luckily for us, 3 fair heroes are not too far behind, as Larry, Curly, Joe, and Mo plan to abscond themselves into the kitchen, pretending that they are chefs, to basically have a bite to eat. To save Quattro, of course. It gets as far as the prince's cell, where they rescue Quattro and try to discreetly leave the palace. Unfortunately, one way or another, the guards are alerted, and Prince Charming has the 3 run straight off, splitting up from him, so he could stay behind and try to fight off the guards. In that clash of those mighty soldiers and Quattro, it was a phenomenal fight, hand to hand, with sword in tow. Unfortunately, though, for Quattro, there was a snake in the midst. But of this, I course mean that there was a guard up on the balcony inside the palace. He drew his arrow and took aim, and fired a shot right into Quattro's chest. He fell to the ground, laying there motionlessly, presumed dead. After a little bit, the 3 managed to find Quattro, and are sad and bereaved that he seems to be dead. With that, the 3 have no choice but to retreat back to the cottage to try and warn Snow White, since they plan to go back to the cottage and capture them all. But for them, unfortunately, they had a run-in with Count Olga. But luckily, with Bo's quick thinking, he smacked the jerk right onto the ground, and Curly Joe had absconded with the right-hand man's blade. The right-hand man stays there for a moment, very surprised and disoriented, as one does after a mighty smack from Mo. The 3 manage to get back to the cottage as soon as possible, where they try to warn Snow White, telling her that they have to leave immediately. Of course, she wants to stay and basically wait for Quattro, but Mo tries to tell her that they were meeting with him later on. A bold-faced lie, but he had to try and protect the Snow White's heart. Unfortunately, though, the guards come up close on horseback. So, without a word, all four of them hop right into the Stooges' cart and skip straight off. It was a mad chase throughout the valley. The three had tried to do their best to lose the guards, but it was just a useless gesture, as the guards were always upon them, either a few feet away or a great distance, depending on how you see it. So, at that moment, Mo himself came up with a very clever plan. He would have them stop on a cliff, and then they would detach the horses from the cart. It is then that all three of them, with mighty pushes, threw off the cart as it clashed down to the rocks below, looking as if they had a bit of an accident, trying to race off to try and leave the guards, only for them to slam right off the cliff and into the waters below. They hide a few bushes away from the guards, as the guards look and basically investigate whether or not it was a sudden crash, and when they're satisfied, they leave. Unfortunately, this only means it will be a matter of moments before they discover the lie. So Mo, Larry, and Curly tried to get the princess out of the valley as soon as possible, but unfortunately for them, something must have alerted the guards already, because they were on their way back, and this time they would be discovered for sure. It was at that moment that Curly Joe, sad and also scared, he makes up some sort of strange request or a wish that he and them would be on the highest mountain, at the tallest peak, and then whoosh, bang! Suddenly, all four of them are teleported onto a snowy mountain on top of the highest peak of the highest mountain. Cold, shivering, they could not believe it. They were bewildered, bewildered. What could have possibly done this? But it was at that moment Snow White had noticed the strange blade that Curly Joe had taken off of Count Oka. When she discovers who it's from, she realizes that it's the Sword of Power. Now, what is Sword of Power? Well, the Sword of Power was basically a magic-granting artifact, able to grant any user a wish. But the only way it could be done is if a person is pure of heart. Count Oka, honestly, was not a man of pure of heart, so how was he able to use the first wish? Yeah, we don't really know. So, knowing that, Mo demanded Curly Joe to either get them off the mountain or get them into a warm new cottage with a roaring fire, or he'd smack the bejesus out of him, and you don't want to be smacked the bejesus out of by Mo Howard. So, Curly Joe wishes for them to be in a warm cottage with a blazing fire. And so it is thus. And they are safely tucked away in a wood cabin, seemingly out of danger.
That poor prince. He should learn the catching arrow technique. But at least the princess and the Stooges are out of harm's way.
Cornwall could be laying down dead with the arrow sticking out of his chest, and that's the only thing you can think about?
Ow!
Indeed. After the three and Snow White get settled up in the wooden cabin in the mountains, Snow White finally inquires to Mo, Larry, and Curly Joe why Quattro will not be joining them up in the mountains. This is when Mo reveals to her the sad truth that Quattro had been struck by an arrow and killed by the Queen's men. It is at that moment that poor Snow White's heart had shattered. She decides to leave the cabin for a while, going down into the icy, snowy valley down below. As she travels towards the pond, frozen with ice, she then longingly looks at it, remembering better times, which gives her a moniker of joy, but then a deep well of sadness. As she realizes all of her dreams have been broken with Quattro's death, she falls upon the snowbank and then collapses into her own grief, crying in the snow. It is then we are treated to a dreamy-like state, where she imagines a life where Quattro was still alive and well, and she was reunited with him on the snow ice as they skate like pros, longingly being the powerful couple. But sadly, this is when the evil queen, that wicked witch of the West that she is, interrupts their loving, passionate moment. She then tries to snag Snow White away from Prince Charming, but luckily, our three guardian angels, the Stooges, arrive with clubs in hand, and they go after the evil queen, smashing her on the ice. It is then that the queen decides to go and retreat as she grows in fear of all three heavenly divine archangels. But this is when all three of them collapse onto the ice together, slopping over one another in a comedic slapstick funny comedy routine. As our puppet, Quinto, who now is basically a living boy it seems, is laughing over the Stooges' antics as they slip and fall over each other while he himself reunites the princess and Quattro with each other's hands, leaving them to skate lovingly so. They skate like pros upon that frozen lake in that dream-lovey state, and just when it seems like all their dreams would come true, that wicked witch returns with her evil guards as they take Quadro and smack Snow White onto the ground, leaving her in the puddle of ice, sad, lonely, and bereaved.
Thankfully, it seems like the witch is going to get her just desserts as the people are basically at open arms against her. Not to mention, she's losing her mind with every second of her own vanity has gotten the better of her. She just keeps thinking mad thoughts about how Princess Snow is so much more beautiful than she. At the moment, she forces Count Olga to turn her into a hellish witch so she can finally have her own revenge upon Snow White. Count Olga finally giving the queen's wants and needs to transform her into a ugly, wicked old witch. She then sets out on her broomstick, going on her wicked deeds in the dark. But thankfully, shown in the light, Prince Quadro, now fulfilling his role as Prince Charming, takes up arms against the evil queen and her guards after the queen lets away as Count Olga takes charge. Prince Charming, or Quadro, has taken an army of people against the evil queen and her right-hand man as they storm the castle gates, engaging in a furious combat with the forces of the evil queen. Finally, a long-awaited duel between Olga and the prince had arrived as they clash and clang with swords, fighting upon Terence on top of the towers, and finally, after the mighty battle against the evil tyrant, Prince Charming caused Olga to drop off the tower, landing in a cauldron filled with hot motoring oil as the Olga boils alive dead. Finally, the prince gets to take over as a rightful king, and of course, the first thing he wants to do is to find Snow White at any means necessary. We then return to the scene of the hateful witch who plots to get our princess, lands outside the wooden cabin, and takes on a disguise as a poor old gypsy maiden, savoring the fruit to poison our sweet Princess Snow White.
And unfortunately, it seems her plan was working, because after just a subtle bit of enticement, she finally got Snow White to take a bite of that old nasty apple. And with that, she was poisoned, as was fast to work, as she fell to the ground, dead. Seeing that her plan had been fulfilled, the evil queen, disguised as a witch, cackled laughing as she hopped on her broom. Her intentions now were to turn towards our three heroes and their utter destruction, as she couldn't rest until all of her foes were dead. The Stooges, singing a happy song, coming back from a successful hunt, as they have a huge ass buck on their shoulders, were just walking amongst the snowbank when all of a sudden the evil witch struck them down with a lightning bolt, sending them hurled to the ground. They are shocked and pained and bewildered for a minute, and then they gasp, seeing that a random evil witch seemingly struck them for no reason. It is at that moment that they finally realize that the queen must be involved in some way, even though that is the queen. Curly Joe then makes an offhand comment how he wishes the evil queen would be sent straight down to Hades. And it was at that moment that the evil witch suddenly crashed on top of the mountains, and a huge gasp of fire as his wish has been fulfilled. It was at that moment the Three Stooges realized that she was the evil queen, and that Snow White was in trouble, so they had to get back to the cabin as soon as possible. Unfortunately, when they get there, they see that Snow White is unresponsive, presumably dead. The three try to revive her by any means, but it seemingly has no effect. That's when they realize she was poisoned with that apple. Curly Joe tries to make a wish to bring her back, tries to get the magic of the sword to bring her back. Unfortunately, it was much too late. The sword was spent, and all the wishes were gone. Broken hearted, Curly Joe cast the sword into the fire, as all three of them broke down, sobbing in the loss of their precious princess.
It's so sad.
Burn in haze, you sheebies!
Meanwhile, back at the palace, the prince had awaited patiently for his men to return, with Snow White, or at least her location. Alas, they come back with nothing. After Curly Joe basically made the wish to send all three of them and the princess off to the icy snow mountaintops, their whereabouts become unknown to anyone in the castle, or even the world so far, since, it was a random ass wish by Curly to save them all. Anyway, in his desperation, the prince had decided to turn to the one artifact that might actually know where Snow White was: the mirror. You see, the mirror was a magical artifact that the queen, aka the evil witch that is now burning in the center of Hades, was using to basically make Snow White's life a living hell, or at the very least, spy on her. The prince was very reluctant of using such a devious artifact, but the prince was desperate. So he turned to the mirror, making a heartfelt plea to show him where the location where Snow White could be, or at the very least, the start to somewhere where she would be. The mirror had pointed a path towards the highest peaks, the highest mountain. And with that, the prince arose, strutting out with his galloping horse, as he rode out to the lands in the wilderness to find her. And of course, we're treated to a very, shall I say, laborious backdrop. And it's just random footages of random kingdoms and stuff that the prince might or may not have gone through. And it all basically kind of looked like it was ridiculous, since it all kind of looked better when cartoons did it. But in any case, when the prince finally found the cabin, the Three Stooges were already busy holding a service for Snow White. You see, they had built her a golden glass coffin as to preserve her body, so that not even the air could take away her beauty. Plus, the Stooges loved her so much they couldn't dare to think about actually burying her. So, they created the coffin so that they could hold the service where they could see her for all time. And that is when our man Quattro, aka the prince, struts in handsomely and heroically, and the trio of miscreants cheered in jubilation at their adopted son's return. However, the base celebration was basically ruined when the prince realized that Snow White was no more. Saddened and heartbroken, the prince opened the coffin and then made a desperate plea for Snow White to wake up, holding her in his arms, wishing upon hope beyond hope, that she would return. Suddenly, out of nowhere, she started gasping for air as she came back to life. It seems that in this version, unlike the others where you basically had to do a true love's first kiss, I guess true love's hug works just as well. I mean, I think that's how it would work in MLP anyway. But no matter. We had finally come to the end of our journey, as the prince, princess, and all of our heroes, who are now decorated soldiers of the kingdom, ride off back into the sunset, back to the castle, back into a place called happiness.
I love happy endings, just like I love the Three Stooges.
And so that concludes our story of Snow White and the Three Stooges. Now, this wasn't exactly what I would call an instant classic, or at the very least, how it basically was greeted during the early summers of the 1960s, since this movie basically was a flop upon impact. Or at the very least, nowadays we would say it in our generation, it was dead on arrival. However, this movie had become quickly an occult classic, as it was a very well-balanced rendition of the Snow White and the dwarves. Only instead of dwarves, it was the Three Stooges. And might I add, like I probably said in the beginning, they did not overstay their welcome, the Stooges. In fact, you might have actually implied that it would have been an okay movie even without the Stooges. As even though the movie is supposed to be Snow White and the Three Stooges, the Three Stooges' antics were pretty cut and sort of dry for like the Stooge rendition of the Snow White. While the Stooges were there and they basically replaced the dwarves, they didn't overstate their comings and goings. In fact, their comings and goings were pretty quick, in and out. If anything, I would say it's a Stooge flavoring of Snow White. They're there, they do their things, and they're a welcome addition, but they're not exactly overstated house guests in this movie. And in fact, I would even dare say they probably did a better version of Snow White than that dreaded piece of druggery that is 2019's Snow White. Honestly, a version without the dwarves is one thing. A version with those CGI nightmares is a complete and total other thing. This movie, to me, is probably one of the best renditions of Snow White in general. You see, it comes basically like this, kiddies. You have the original Snow White telling of the Grimm story, which by itself is a really good book. I highly recommend reading it. Then you also have your Disney Snow White, which is probably the best overall when it comes to old style 50s animation. However, this version I feel like is a good predecessor to those films or that book. Is it one of the best Stooges movies ever? Probably not. In fact, if I had to say anything, I would say that Three Stooges meeting Hercules is probably a bit better than this film. Maybe even Have Rocket Will Travel. Keep an eye out for that one. But I will say this. As the Stooges were getting into their twilight years, and they were trying to get away from their more violent antics, basically since the Mothers Union was basically all over them for their violence, this rendition of the storytelling of Snow White was pretty damn good. And if I had to give it a rating, my own personal rating, I would say this is a solid 4 dwarves out of 5. Well, that about wraps it up for Downtime. Once again, I'm Alexander, the Unconventional Gentleman.
And I'm Casey's Hammer Fighter.
And this was Downtime. Remember to like and subscribe.
And comment down below for any ideas or future suggestions for Downtime.
Ciao.
Stay awesome, everybody.